What is up, everybody? So, just wanted to come out with another Hydroid video. I know Hydroid is not exactly the most popular Warframe, but he does have a really sweet deluxe skin, and he's a pirate, basically, and the Kuvazar just came out. So, if we can't use the Kuvazar on Hydroid, there's just something wrong with the world. So, this build was almost, I will say, inspired by the Kuvazar. Because, what better feeling is it to play Hydroid with a cannon and, throw on something like a Destreza Rapier or whatever and pretend you're a pirate, a space ninja pirate. So, um, I do also think Hydroid is not nearly as bad as people say he is. I'm not going to go out there and say that Hydroid is not in need of fairly serious help, but I don't think he's like unplayable like a lot of people probably would. Um, I definitely think that there are certain things that Hydroid can do. Um, and this build's actually been pretty fun. Decent amount of like mobility, synergizes really well with explosive weapons, which are very meta right now. I think we're kind of in like a explosive primary weapon meta almost. Um, and so I just wanted to show a little bit of the playstyle for this build before I went into it. So in general, um, you leverage your two sucking enemies together combined with a explosive weapon to clear stuff. And that lets you be pretty mobile, very safe, because you can reset your shield gating with the energy cost of your two. In addition, it has pretty good CC. It actually has status immunity built in, so you don't even need to run something like Prime Pressure Point, which I know can be a bit of a sore spot for newer players because the only way to get, not Prime Pressure Point, Prime Sure-Footed, because the only way to get Prime Sure-Footed is just from login rewards. So, which, kind of stinks for new players. Um, it's not, too insane in terms of like the mods that it needs. It doesn't even really need a helmet ability. Um, so let me just get out of here, run into the simulacrum, and then we can go over the build. Alright, so we're here on the simulacrum. Going to be going over a few different options. The main component to this build, I guess it kind of includes your whole loadout pretty much. Outside of your melee, which you can kind of use whatever you want. This build actually does work pretty well with melee weapons, though, in addition to explosive weapons. So this is a shield gating build for Hydroid. You can run, obviously, Arcane Energize is always super good. You can run Arcane Aegis. You could run a damage-focused Arcane, whatever you want. We have the traditional shield gating mods with Brief Respite and Rolling Guard. I'm actually going to just take this out of here right now. So the rest of the build is focused on a lot of range. So we're running both Overextended and Augur Reach. Now the reason why we're not running Stretch is deliberate, because Hydroid has quite a bit of base shields. So even with a Decaying Dragon Key, and you can see I have that equipped, I still have 131 shields. So with Brief Respite, Augur Reach, and I'm going to show the secondary weapon really quick. I don't care. I can take off every single mod on this weapon. I literally don't care what this weapon does. It just needs to have 2 Augur mods. And the reason for that is these 2 Augur mods combined with Augur Reach makes it so that when I use Tidal Surge or any 50 energy ability, which is all of his abilities except for his one, I will fully recharge my shields. And so I will actually, I think it's 135 shields that I'll generate. So that's very important because you always, if you're doing a shield gating build and you're relying on using abilities to regenerate shields, you really want to make sure you're regenerating all of your shields. Because if you're not regenerating all your shields, you're losing out on a huge portion of shield gating. And that can very easily get you killed. The difference in playing, if there's one thing in this build that you're going to like copy, it's using this many auger mods with brief respite and no efficiency. The alternative is you could run blind rage, so using more energy and less auger mods, but you spam abilities a lot with this build, and Hydroid doesn't have the biggest energy pool, even with Prime Flow, so might not be the best idea to run negative efficiency. Plus, strength just really doesn't do anything for Hydroid's kit. So I've been trying to make, I have another Hydroid video. I do actually really like playing Hydroid for some masochistic reason. And, you kind of just have to resign yourself to the fact that because his kit has no inherent scaling outside of his normal 3, his puddle, there's really no reason to build strength on Hydroid if you're dropping his 3. I personally don't like the playstyle of running Hydroid's 3. The puddle focused builds are strong. I mean, he's invulnerable. I mean, strong quotation marks. He's invulnerable. Eventually, things will die. Stuff like that. I just really don't like that playstyle. It just isn't for me. So I do like the rest of his abilities, though. So I take off his 3 with Helminth. And I think there's 2 really good options for this build. So as you can see, I'm running, a decent amount of duration, mostly range, no efficiency, which is important because of the abilities, as we mentioned. I'm not running Prime Surefooted, and that's because I am running Tidal Impunity. And so when you use your 2, which you are constantly spamming, and having a little extra duration, or having some duration gives you a little larger of a buff window. So this gives you status immunity for yourself and all your allies, which is actually kind of nice. It's like, it kind of makes this a little bit of a nice team build as well. So status immunity, in my opinion, is actually quite nice in Warframe. And the reason for that is because status immunity makes you immune to knockdowns and staggers. And with a shield gating build, when I've taken shield gating builds to high levels, a lot of times what ends up killing you is like a heat dot or slash. Obviously, toxin is always dangerous. And while this won't prevent toxin damage from getting through your shields, it will prevent toxin dots from killing you, which can be really nice. That's, status effects being so annoying is why some builds, run rapid resilience. That way you can kind of dodge dots easier within your shield gate windows, stuff like that. So I think this augment is much better than people probably give it credit for, which doesn't surprise me because this augment actually was not functioning since it got released up until a couple months ago when I reported a bug that this wasn't working. So I just don't think most people play Hydroid. That's what I've kind of realized, which makes sense. He has a pretty negative perception, which is in part justified. So rolling guard, shield gating, prime flow for the energy, range, equilibrium. So this build spams a lot. So I decided to go for the old combo of equilibrium with synth mods on your pet with a Panzervolpaphyla, because you do use abilities a lot with this build, which makes it really fun for me. Like, I like using abilities a lot, but it can make it pretty energy hungry, and equilibrium really helps you get all the energy you need to keep going. And as I almost never ever have energy abilities or energy issues. Hydroid's energy costs are actually pretty low. like even his ultimate is 50 energy. And when I said that I was using Hydroid for my Steel Path dailies, I was using him for like all my Steel Path dailies, like defense missions, execute missions, everything. And for missions, and this is where I'm kind of going to get into this last mod slot, which is very flexible. So there's a few mods that I would run in that spot. One, you could always just run stretch, more range, right? So stretch is pretty good. Natural talent is another good option. You could run something. I mean, those are pretty good options. Um, and then you can also run augments. So pilfering swarm, if you want to, because your tentacles don't have to kill enemies. It's just enemies held by your tentacles, right? So I was running this on the Kuva Fortress defense mission, which is one of my least favorite missions in the game, on Steel Path, and I actually was very surprised at how good of a job I could do at protecting the objective and killing enemies, CCing them with a combination of my 4, my 1, and my helmet ability. And I keep saying helmet ability in general because I don't necessarily think shooting gallery is the only option here. I personally like shooting gallery quite a bit. I will say that muzzle flash I've seen becoming a little more popular on helmet builds, incorporating shooting gallery. I would caution against using muzzle flash on this build, and the reason is that the normal like mini stun that shooting gallery does on enemies will not prevent you from sucking them up with tidal surge, but the blind from muzzle flash will. So if you blind enemies with muzzle flash, you have to wait for the blind to wear off before you can pick them up with tidal surge. And that kind of interrupts the flow of the build, and it's like, it's just a little annoying sometimes. So pilfering swarm, if it's a slower mission where you're defending stuff, that's a good option. If you're another option that is like you know a little more memey, but I always like frames where you can actually use all their abilities. So one cool thing, and this is something that I highlighted a little bit in my older Hydroid video, is, and that's even more relevant now, is that your tentacle swarm does magnetic damage. You can augment your Tempest Barrage to apply corrosive procs, and those combined with the fact that ranged weapons have Gundition overload now, um, that kind of synergizes with ranged weapons a little bit in addition to melee, so having those extra status effects. So corroding barrage is actually an option you could use there. I've messed around with that. I thought it was pretty fun actually. Um, but really, you can kind of put whatever you want. I think, if you want to just throw Pilfering Swarm, that's a pretty safe option. So that's the build I've been using for Hydroid. The Kuvazar is, pretty standard build, nothing too crazy. I had a Heat Kuvazar, so I need to change this to Cold or Toxin, probably Toxin. And then I can drop this mod for a Bane mod. I also don't have the primed Bane mod, so it's another reason why I wasn't focusing as much on including Viral on here. But I should not really have Viral on here. I should not have this mod, and I should have a Bane mod instead. Um, but, Kubazar is obviously one of, if not the strongest weapons in the game, so I'm just going to be upfront that this build really only works if you have a good weapon to synergize with it. So like a Kuva Brahma, a Tsar, a Envoy, those kinds of weapons, which are pretty meta right now, are really going to make this build shine. Secondary literally doesn't matter. I'm only using this as like a stat stick for auger mods. Your melee, I was running a heavy attack Livia. I'm not even going to show the build because it doesn't really matter. You can kind of run like any build or any kind of weapon you want. Like, for example, you could run like a normal melee instead of a heavy attack melee, and then you'll slurp all your enemies up, and then you can just go ham, meleeing them down, and they're all in nice melee range and stuff. So, that's one thing that you can do. And melee is still really good. So, that's an option. So you can either, I would say you can either use, because you kind of need to use your secondary as a stat stick, you can either use a melee approach or a primary weapon to do most of the bulk of your damage, or both, depending on your playstyle. Zenuric, I just picked Zenuric because of the synergy with getting a little more energy, as well as I was running a heavy attack weapon, so having a little more efficiency is nice little bonus. You can probably run anything here, doesn't really matter. You can, and then for the pet, I've continue to really like the Panzer Vulpaphyla. It's an incredibly strong companion. I think Tech Assault is just the number of times this thing has saved my companion is innumerable. 60% of the time, it works 100% of the time. It is awesome. This thing will keep your Kavat alive so much longer. Then you have, pretty standard stuff outside of this, right? Like viral quills, blah, blah, blah. Then if for some reason your shield gating you mess up and you need another save mechanic, you've got Martyr Symbiosis to help you out. And this is just kind of the icing on the cake. Like, I don't... The Panzer Vulpaphyla is just absolutely nuts. I feel like it's just... now that they've kind of nerfed... They didn't really directly nerf the Smita, but they kind of nerfed how people were using the Smita, and I love using this pet. It's so strong. And then the two synth mods that synergize with Equilibrium. Synth Fiber is very, 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 very important for this build, because you cannot pick up health orbs if you have full health unless you're using Synth Fiber. So this is very important for this build. So yeah, there you have it. So that's Hydroid, the build I've been using. I'll just kind of show it one more time. Maybe I'll throw on the Olivia this time. I think I was using, I thought this skin looked pretty nice with this Hydroid look. Kind of looks like something you might find underwater. One kind of cool thing that I did, just as like a last little synergy, is since enemies are all just right here, it's really easy to build up combo. And that's another reason why heavy attacks are kind of fun with this build, is you slurp enemies up, you build up combo real quick, and then you can just use a max combo, 12x heavy attack, which is, ooh, that is super satisfying. So yeah, there's Hydroid. I know he's not a very popular Warframe, but this deluxe skin is like, ooh man, oh, it's just, in my opinion, it's one of the coolest looking things in Warframe, period. And it's literally enough reason for me to play this frame. And I'm secretly hoping that if I play it and, maybe more people play it, maybe someday they'll give Hydroid some buffs. Not that I really actually think that Hydroid needs a whole ton of buffs. I think that they could make some pretty small changes, and that would get him pretty far. Kind of like how they did with Titania or Garuda. Like, step one. Like, why does this have a charge time? Why does this have a charge time? Just give it its full effect right away. Or make it like a tap hold kind of thing with like Zephyr. I don't know. Something. For other helmet abilities, shooting gallery is nice. I was looking primarily for things that scaled well with duration and range, but not strength. So that knocks out a lot of helmet abilities. I think the other really good option is Silence. I messed around with that. Silence is definitely really good. Unfortunately, this build almost runs too much range for silence to be good, because silence really shines when you're running like 80 to 100% range, because then you can dance in and out and constantly stun enemies, and you can control when they're CC'd a little better, and you still get that benefit of enemies being silenced and not being able to use abilities when they're close to you. So I almost feel like this build has too much range to really leverage silence very well. So that left shooting gallery was a good option. I'm sure that there's other helmet abilities that work well with this build. But this is, the helmet ability doesn't exactly make this build tick. It kind of just works even without, whatever helmet ability you want to use. I think shooting gallery is just kind of a safe pick because it gives you more CC. When you go to slurp enemies up, you'll get things in a pretty big area, but there might be some enemies you missed, and shooting gallery can cover you for those. It's all about giving yourself more redundancies and protections against incoming damage while you're trying to reset your shields, because I think one common misconception that people run into is like, okay, if I do an ability and it resets my shields, that's all well and good, but you still need to kill stuff, which means you're gonna need time and you're going to have to um, be able to, fight enemies. So if all you're doing is using abilities and CCing enemies, or just using abilities to reset your shields, that's not a very good shield gating build. A shield gating build really shines if there's CC involved, whether that's, and I've used his 4, even his 1 to knock down enemies is actually not the worst thing ever. His, using shooting gallery to get some disarms, and you've got the pull in on his 2. So all those combined, I mean, I've played this build in a lot of Steel Path missions the past week, and I felt very, very safe. Um, so I've been really liking this build. Hopefully, it gives you some motivation to play Hydroid. He's a pretty cool frame, and hopefully he gets maybe some buffs. So just want to say thanks for watching. Um, I always appreciate it. Any comments or suggestions would be great. So thanks very much, and I hope you have a good day.